You ever try to mind your business after serving your country for over 2 decades just to come home and get targeted by an HOA with too much time on their hands and way too little sense? Yeah, that was me. Name's Brandon Cole. Retired Navy Lieutenant Commander. After my last patrol run in the Pacific, I came back stateside thinking I'd found peace on a quiet lakefront property just outside of Charleston. Bought the place fair and square, no liens, no issues. And just to stay close to what I love, I bought an old Navy patrol boat, restored her top to bottom, and docked her right outside my back porch. She wasn't just a boat to me. That vessel had history. She had grit. We patrolled coastlines with her during tensions overseas that would have made your hair turn gray if it wasn't already. And now she was my weekend retreat. My way of staying close to the sea while keeping my boots dry. But here's the thing about moving into a so-called managed community. They always say the HOA is there to help. To keep things orderly. To preserve neighborhood integrity. What they really mean is give a few bitter folks a clipboard and a little power and they'll come after anything that doesn't match their beige fantasy. That's how I met her. Karen Langley. The self-declared enforcer of our HOA. She wore her sunglasses like a badge of honor and walked around with a little yappy dog named Winston who barked more than she did. She rolled up to my dock one morning with her phone out and her nose turned up. "Excuse me, sir," she said like I was trespassing on my own property. "That boat is in direct violation of HOA aesthetic standards." I looked up from my wrench and squinted. "Ma'am, this is my dock. That's my boat. And it's a federally registered naval vessel turned private. Not exactly a lawn gnome." She sniffed. "You need written approval for visible structures or vehicles over a certain size. That thing," she pointed like it was a crime scene, "is obstructing the lake view for other homeowners. We'll be tagging it for removal if you don't comply." I should have ignored her. I really should have. But when someone walks onto your dock without invitation and starts throwing rules at you like you're some teenager who just parked a junk car in the yard, it's hard to stay silent. You tag that boat and you'll be tagging a government-inspected and licensed vessel. That'll be on you. Not me. She turned and walked away like she just won some imaginary war. And I thought that was the end of it. I really did. 3 days later I found a fluorescent orange sticker plastered on the hull. Not just taped. Glued. Like they used construction-grade adhesive. The words violation stood bold in the center. HOA demand for removal written below. And right underneath in Karen's handwriting it said, "Final notice, immediate action required." Now let me explain something real quick. That boat was painted in a historically preserved naval gray. Every bolt and rail had been authenticated and restored. That sticker? It tore the paint right off when I tried to peel it. I was livid. Not just because it was disrespectful but because now that damage meant expensive restoration. Again. I called the HOA office. Got voicemail. Drove down to the so-called headquarters. A room in a community center with dusty blinds and fake plants. The receptionist there looked nervous when I asked to speak to the board. "They're in session right now, sir. You can file a complaint in writing." "I'll wait." I sat in the lobby for an hour. Finally the door opened and there she was. Karen in a floral blouse with a thick binder clutched to her chest. She froze when she saw me. I stood. "We need to talk. Now." Her smile was all plastic. "Brandon, right? If this is about the tag, it's standard enforcement. You can appeal at the next meeting." I leaned in just enough for her to understand I wasn't playing games. "You damaged federal property. That boat is registered through the Coast Guard. You vandalized it." Her expression flickered for half a second but she recovered fast. "Well, sir, if you had submitted proper paperwork this wouldn't have been necessary." There it was. The arrogance. The belief that her HOA policies trumped everything including federal regulations. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just ignorance. It was targeted. I filed a formal complaint that night. Then I contacted my old friend Mason from the Navy JAG Corps. He'd handled cases involving military property disputes and knew the ins and outs of federal protections. "You're not going to believe this," Mason said after reviewing my photos and documents. "They've breached federal property rights and might have violated maritime registration codes depending on how they filed that tag. You want to go after them?" "Full throttle," I said. The next few weeks turned into a paper war. Karen started rallying the HOA against me. I got letters saying I was non-compliant. That I was disturbing the visual harmony of the community. Neighbors started whispering. One guy even told me, "Hey man, I love the boat but Karen's got the board wrapped around her finger. You might want to just move it before it gets worse." Worse. Oh, it did. They tried to fine me next. Claimed I was racking up daily penalties for non-removal of an unauthorized marine vehicle. I laughed when I read the letter. Then I sent it straight to Mason. "This is gold," he told me. "They're digging their own grave." Karen came by again 2 weeks later with her same little dog and that same look of triumph. She smiled like this was her victory lap. "You know, Brandon, it doesn't have to be like this. If you move the boat, we can reduce the penalties. Maybe even waive them." I looked her square in the eye. "You ever been fined $450,000, Karen?" She blinked. "Excuse me?" "Because that's what's coming. You don't get to touch government property without consequences." She scoffed. "That's nonsense." Then she left. Fast. What she didn't know was that Mason had already filed the paperwork. Federal damages. Maritime registration interference. Property vandalism under the Federal Boating Infrastructure Grant Program. Plus emotional distress and loss of value due to unauthorized HOA action. He was pulling every statute and clause he could find. I wasn't just defending a boat. I was defending every veteran who came home only to be pushed around by power-tripping paper pushers hiding behind HOA rulebooks. It had been 3 weeks since Karen Langley tagged my patrol boat like it was some rusted lawn trailer instead of a registered naval vessel, and ever since then the battle had shifted into something much bigger than neighborhood drama. I had proof of the damage. Photos of the adhesive tearing through historic naval paint. Witness statements from my neighbor across the lake. And most importantly, I had Mason, my JAG buddy who knew every legal twist these HOA boards try to hide behind. He filed the first notice that week. A formal letter. Printed on legal stationery. Delivered via certified mail to the HOA office with language so sharp it probably gave Karen a paper cut just opening it. It stated clearly that their actions violated not only state property laws but also federal maritime codes. That they had defaced and vandalized a federally documented vessel. And that the homeowner, me, was preparing to escalate to civil court unless the HOA retracted the violation, paid for full restoration, and issued a formal apology. Their response was silence. For days. Nothing. Not a phone call. Not a letter. Not even an email. And that silence? It told me everything I needed to know. Karen wasn't just ignoring the warning. She was doubling down. Sure enough, on a Thursday morning at 6 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a tow truck backing up toward my dock. Flashing lights. Beeping. Men in reflective vests walking toward the boat with chains in their hands. I stormed out in my boots and tee. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The older guy looked at a clipboard and shrugged. "We got a work order from the HOA for unauthorized vessel removal." I pointed straight at the bow of my boat. "That vessel is federally documented and registered. You touch it and you're tampering with federal property. You ready to go to court over that?" He looked confused, pulled out his phone, and made a call. He kept nodding, looking at me, and then finally, he turned back to his crew. "Pack it up, boys. Someone's screwing around with paperwork. We're not touching this thing." I watched them leave, but I wasn't calm. I was beyond livid. Karen had now crossed a line that wasn't just about personal offense. This was coordinated action. With forged authority. Trying to seize property they had no right to even approach. I walked straight back inside, called Mason, and gave him the update. "Now they've tried to impound it." He whistled low. "That's unlawful seizure under federal boating rights. We're upping the claim." And we did. He amended the complaint. Now the HOA wasn't just facing fines for damage. They were looking at an attempted illegal seizure of federal property. That bumped the estimated damages up. Well, Karen had no clue. But she just moved the needle from HOA slap on the wrist to nearly $500,000 in exposure. But still, they didn't stop. 2 days later I found another violation notice duct taped to my mailbox. This one claimed I was in violation for having an unauthorized flagpole on my property. Now the pole had been there for 3 years. I flew the American flag and the Navy ensign. Every morning. Same spot. Never an issue. Until now. Now it was visually disruptive. Mason laughed when I showed him. "They're retaliating." "Perfect. Keep every single one. Print copies. Let's stack the evidence." Karen was losing control of the narrative. So she did what Karens do. She called a special board meeting. And made it open to the community. She wanted to turn this into a show. Make me look like the villain. Play the martyr in front of the other homeowners. I went. Sat right up front. Arms folded. Wearing a navy ball cap and a jacket with my rank and insignia embroidered over the chest. She stood up with her little binder and said, "We have a situation involving a non-compliant homeowner whose vessel and property are in violation of several articles." I raised my hand. She ignored me. I raised it higher. Kept it there until someone in the back actually said, "Let him speak." She scowled but nodded. So I stood. And I didn't just speak. I laid it out. I explained the federal registration, the naval history, the Coast Guard documentation, the damage done by the tag, the attempted illegal tow. And then I showed the crowd photos of the sticker and the torn paint. I explained what that meant in terms of historic preservation laws. And I ended it by saying this. I didn't come here to fight. I came here to live in peace. But if peace means being silent while someone tramples on rights protected by the Constitution and federal law, then I guess I picked the wrong neighborhood. It was quiet after that. Dead quiet. Until someone clapped. Then another. Then half the room. Karen stood frozen. Binder clutched like it was about to fall. She muttered something about process and proper decorum. But the damage was done. Her support was cracking. That night, Mason got a call from the HOA's legal representative. They wanted to discuss a settlement. I knew what that meant. They saw the writing on the wall. They knew the fines were coming. That their only play now was damage control. But Mason wasn't in a forgiving mood. He told them, we'd consider a resolution if they agreed to 3 things. 1. Full reimbursement for the damages to the patrol boat. 2. An HOA-wide written apology for harassment and wrongful action. 3. Karen Langley's resignation from the board effective immediately. Their lawyer said he'd get back to us. We knew they'd balk. They'd push back. Try to stall. Maybe even try one last dirty trick. And we were ready for it. But then, something happened that changed everything. We got a call from the Department of Veteran Affairs. Apparently a veteran outreach officer had been forwarded photos of the boat damage. And he was not happy. He contacted the Office of Naval Heritage. And within days, a formal inquiry was launched into the HOA's actions. Now it wasn't just me and Mason. Now it was the Navy. And when the Navy gets involved, you better believe things start to move fast. That boat, that tag, that glow. It wasn't just HOA business anymore. It was federal business. And Karen? She was about to learn what happens when you take on the wrong sailor, with the wrong boat, in the wrong war. The Navy had officially stepped in. And that changed everything. You see, up until now Karen Langley thought this was a neighborhood scuffle. A petty HOA back and forth. Her against the retired sailor with the big gray boat. But the moment she tagged that vessel, the moment she left adhesive stuck to the hull of a federally registered naval patrol boat, she didn't just break HOA rules. She triggered federal oversight. The Office of Naval Heritage wasn't just interested. They were furious. That boat was part of a preserved class that had been decommissioned with honor. And tampering with its restoration was not taken lightly. They sent out an official inspection crew. Real officers. Clipboards, uniforms, documentation. 3 men stood at my dock taking photos, asking questions, taking samples of the adhesive still stuck to the hull, and recording interviews. And they weren't alone. A representative from the Department of Veteran Affairs showed up too. He shook my hand firmly and said, "This is an embarrassment, sir. You served your country. This is not how you should be treated." I nodded, but I didn't smile. Not yet. Because I knew we were only halfway through this war. The HOA had been silent for days now, which made sense. They were scrambling. Their legal team was probably trying to figure out how to bury this without setting the entire neighborhood on fire. But Karen? She wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to go quietly. And I should have seen it coming. Because petty doesn't sleep. It schemes. Waits. And then it strikes. And she struck. With a letter. Delivered to every single home in the neighborhood. Typed out and printed on HOA letterhead. Signed at the bottom by Karen herself. The letter accused me of exploiting my military status for personal gain. It claimed I was using intimidation tactics. That my warship was a threat to neighborhood tranquility. That my refusal to comply was borderline militant. She even said I was trying to defame a respected community board for personal attention. And at the end of the letter she included a suggestion. That perhaps the neighborhood should vote to remove military vessels from the lake entirely. The letter was desperate, but it was dangerous too, because it was full of lies, and it painted me as some kind of unhinged rogue veteran, which is not only insulting, it's potentially slander, and I wasn't going to let it slide. Mason read the letter and didn't even blink. He picked up his phone and called a journalist, a local one, military friendly. We knew that if Karen wanted to make this public, we were going to go bigger, and we did. 2 days later the headline on the evening news read, "Veterans Patrol Boat Targeted by HOA, Navy Launches Federal Investigation." And it wasn't just a headline. It was a full segment. They interviewed me on the dock. Footage of the boat shimmered in the lake sunlight. They showed the tag, the torn paint, and the letter Karen had sent out. In full. Unedited. On screen. And let me tell you something. The internet exploded. Veteran groups shared it across every platform. Retired Navy Facebook pages. Military TikToks. News subreddits. It was everywhere. Support started pouring in. Messages from people across the country. Some offering to donate toward legal costs. Others just saying thank you for standing up. Even some local neighbors who had stayed quiet until now started speaking up. Turns out, Karen had been pulling this kind of power trip for years. Fining people for mailbox height. Trying to ban American flags because they clashed with the HOA's natural color palette. Even harassing a family for painting their front door navy blue. It wasn't about boats, or paint, or flags. It was about control, about power. And now the entire country could see it. Karen had officially become a national symbol for everything wrong with HOA abuse. But she still didn't back down. That week I got a notice from the HOA board. They were calling an emergency vote to decide whether or not to impose a community-wide restriction on military-grade equipment. They claimed it was to preserve the safety and visual serenity of the lake environment. But we all knew the truth. This was Karen's last swing. Her final desperate move. To try and get rid of the boat. To save face. To win. The vote was scheduled for Saturday. At 3 p.m. I showed up early. Wore my full dress whites. Stood at the front of the community center room as people filed in. Some avoided eye contact. Others nodded respectfully. A few even shook my hand. Karen sat at the front with the board. Still clutching her binder. Still wearing that smug little smirk. The board president stood up and read the proposed motion. To restrict all military vehicles and equipment from common view within the neighborhood. Then he opened the floor. I walked up, looked out over the room, and spoke. I didn't bring a war to this lake. I brought history. I brought restoration. I brought something this country should be proud of. I pointed out the window toward the lake. That boat is part of who I am. Part of what I fought for. And it's not going anywhere. Then I stepped back. Silence followed. Until one of the newer neighbors stood up. I don't care about boats or politics. But I know harassment when I see it. And this whole thing stinks of it. Another woman stood. Karen tried to fine me last year for planting sunflowers. Called them too tall for compliance. I say let the man have his boat. It was like a dam breaking. One by one. People started speaking out. Not just about me. About her. About years of fines, threats, notes left on doors. It all came out. And when the vote finally happened, it wasn't even close. Motion denied. Overwhelmingly. Karen sat there blinking. Binder limp in her lap. And for the first time, she looked nervous, because now she wasn't just facing a lawsuit. She was losing the neighborhood, losing control. And she knew it. But the real storm was still on the horizon, because Mason had just gotten word that the Office of Naval Heritage had completed its investigation, and they were about to deliver their findings to both the HOA and the federal court. And when they did, Karen's little sticker was about to become one very expensive mistake. The letter arrived on a Monday, stamped with a Navy seal across the front, and signed by a command inspector from the Office of Naval Heritage. It was official. The investigation into the defacement of my patrol boat had concluded, and the verdict was brutal. Karen Langley and the HOA had violated federal maritime protection statutes. They had unlawfully damaged a vessel listed under historical preservation. They had attempted an illegal seizure through a private towing service without proper legal jurisdiction. And worse, they had escalated the situation after being given written notice of the potential federal consequences. In simple terms, they were done. The Navy wasn't just requesting compensation. They were demanding it. The fine was set at $450,000. Every dollar itemized. $42,000 for hull restoration. $80,000 for structural reevaluation due to adhesive damage. $100,000 for violation of federal veteran protection statutes. And the rest? Punitive damages. To send a message. You do not tamper with Navy property. Not in your driveway. Not in your backyard. And especially not at the edge of a lake where it's being flown under a Navy ensign with a veteran owner on board. I walked straight down to the HOA office with the letter in hand. Karen was there. Of course. Still wearing her oversized sunglasses indoors like she was trying to block out accountability. She looked up. saw the envelope in my hand, and tried to act calm. But her hand twitched just slightly. That was the tell. I laid the letter on the counter and said, "It's official." She opened it. "Read it." Her jaw tightened. Her lips thinned. She read it again. And then she said nothing. She just sat back in her chair like someone had unplugged her. Because no speech, no binder, no vote, was going to erase what was now black and white. They had lost. Not just the battle. The war. She tried one last line of defense. One final pathetic attempt. I was just doing my duty. I shook my head. No, ma'am. You were doing your ego's bidding. And now the whole country knows it. She tried to say something else. But the HOA treasurer came out of the back office and waved me over. He looked tired. Older man. Glasses resting on his nose like they were heavier than usual. "I served too," he said. "Vietnam." And he shook my hand. Firm. Real. "On behalf of the rest of the board, we're sorry. This went too far." I nodded. Respectfully. But I wasn't done yet. The Navy letter wasn't just a demand for financial restitution. It also required the HOA to publicly acknowledge their wrongdoing. In writing. Distributed to every homeowner. And placed permanently into HOA records. They tried to negotiate that. Mason laughed. They tried to suggest softer language. He laughed again. In the end they agreed. Because they had no legal footing left to stand on. 2 weeks later, every mailbox in the neighborhood received a 4-page letter. On HOA letterhead. But this time. Not written by Karen. It opened with an admission. The board had acted on incomplete and unauthorized information. They had failed to verify the legal status of the patrol boat. They had improperly escalated enforcement measures without consulting legal advisors. They had inflicted damage on private property. And they had issued penalties without authority. But the real moment? The part that sealed everything? Was the 3rd page. A printed formal resignation letter from Karen Langley herself. No spin. No excuses. Just a flat announcement. That she was stepping down immediately from all HOA duties. Effective permanently. And that she would no longer be involved in board decisions or enforcement. She was done. Just like that. And when the letter hit, the neighborhood finally exhaled. You could feel it. Like a weight lifted. People who never said a word before suddenly started waving from their porches. Kids rode bikes without getting scolded. The flagpoles came back out. The lake felt lighter. And my boat? She floated just a little taller. The irony? Karen didn't even live on the lakefront. She had a townhouse near the main road. Couldn't even see the water from her kitchen window. Yet she tried to control it. Tried to police it. Tried to own it. And now, she couldn't even walk past it without feeling the eyes of every neighbor she ever fined for having a flower pot in the wrong place. But the story wasn't quite over yet. Because Mason and I? We weren't just looking for reimbursement. We were looking for reform. Karen was a symptom. Not the disease. HOAs all across the country had been pulling stunts like this for years. Quietly. Aggressively. Illegally. We wanted to set precedent. We wanted to make sure the next Karen thought twice before trying to slap a sticker on a boat she didn't understand. So Mason filed one more motion. A petition to the state legislature. To propose a bill that would prevent HOA boards from penalizing any active or retired military vessel or symbol without direct court approval. And guess what? It passed committee in less than 30 days. Bipartisan. Unanimous. Because nobody wants to be the lawmaker who votes against veterans. The HOA board had to send out a follow-up letter. Explaining that all future HOA enforcement would now comply with the new guidelines. And that any veteran property would be considered protected under state law. It wasn't just a win. It was a message. We don't back down. We don't bow to petty power. And we sure as hell don't let some clipboard queen rewrite the rules of patriotism. Karen moved out a few months later. Word was she sold her place below market. Too much bad energy, she told someone at the market. Or maybe she just couldn't stand seeing my patrol boat out on the lake. Every morning. Every sunset. Flying the Navy flag. Peaceful. Proud. Untouched. Unbothered. Unmoved. And the best part? I had just added a brass plaque to the dock. Engraved with a single line. One that every neighbor walked past and smiled at. Read. Tagged by Karen. Defended by the Navy. After the fine was paid. After the apology letters were printed. After Karen packed her boxes and slipped out of the neighborhood without a goodbye. You'd think the story ended there. But it didn't. Because sometimes, when the storm clears, that's when the real work begins. The boat. My boat. She was back in prime condition. The Navy covered a portion of the restoration as a courtesy, and the rest came from the settlement. I didn't just fix the paint. I overhauled the entire stern deck, refitted the interior with upgraded seating, installed a new radar dome just to keep the soul of that patrol boat alive. She wasn't just restored, she was reborn. I renamed her too, not out of disrespect, but out of honor. She was no longer just her former designation. She had a story now, a new purpose. I christened her with a nameplate that read, USS Resilience, and believe me, the name fit. The neighbors noticed the change. More people started asking about her. I began giving short lake tours on weekends. For the kids, for the curious, for the veterans who showed up just to touch a piece of real naval history. Sometimes we docked and swapped stories. Other times we just drifted under the orange glow of a South Carolina sunset. The HOA board even invited me to speak at the next community meeting. And this time, there was no hostility, no clipboards, no violation notices, just folded chairs and a microphone. I told them about the boat's origins, her deployments, what it meant to serve aboard her, what it meant to come home and see her attacked with a sticker like she was worthless. And then I said this: we're not just protecting property, we're protecting identity. Service doesn't end when you hang up the uniform. It lives on, in our homes, in our flags, in the water. They applauded, genuinely, and after that night, everything felt different, more open, more unified. The board voted unanimously to create a new clause in the HOA charter, a clause protecting veteran-owned property from aesthetic-based complaints, as long as it met safety code. It stayed. That might sound small to someone who's never had their life reduced to a rule in a binder, but for folks like me, it was everything. Karen? She disappeared. Some say she moved to Florida. Others said she joined another HOA board somewhere in Georgia. Honestly, I didn't care, because I wasn't fighting her anymore. I was building something better. One morning about a month after she left, I was working on the dock tying down a line when I saw a man walking toward me. Tall guy, gray buzz cut, stern face softened by a kind smile. He introduced himself, said he was with a National Veteran Foundation that had seen the story online. They were starting a program, Veteran Lakefront Access Initiative, meant to protect the rights of retired military members who owned watercraft. He asked if I wanted to be their spokesperson. I said yes without blinking. We traveled, gave speeches, shared our story in communities facing similar HOA power trips. In Arizona, in Texas, even California. Same tactics, same pain, same struggle. But now, they had a blueprint. And it started with a patrol boat tagged by a woman who didn't know what she was messing with. The media kept following the story. New outlets did features on HOA abuse, on veterans fighting back, on what happens when you refuse to be bullied by fake authority. And through all that, my phone never stopped ringing. People asking, how did you do it? How do we stand up? My answer was always the same. You get informed, you get organized, and you never, ever, let them take what they don't own. Because once they tag your boat, they'll try to tag your name, your voice, your past. And if you let them, it won't stop. But if you fight back, if you hold your ground, if you call in every ounce of truth and law you've earned, you'll win. And they'll fold. Every single time. One afternoon I got a letter. Not from the HOA. Not from a lawyer. From a high school student. Local kid. Said he'd seen the news segment. Said he used to think the Navy was just ships and sailors yelling at each other in movies. But after hearing my story, he wanted to serve. Wanted to earn a uniform too. That letter meant more than the settlement check. More than the TV spot. It meant the boat still had purpose. Still had power. Still had reach. And that's what they never understood. You don't mess with symbols. You don't tear down things that stand for service and sacrifice. Not because of paint. Not because of pride. And never because of policy. I still take her out every Saturday. The USS Resilience. She hums when the engine kicks in. Smooth. Confident. Like she remembers every wave she ever cut through. Sometimes I see new neighbors wave from the shore. Other times a stranger comes to the dock just to ask if they can look inside. I always let them. Because this story doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to anyone who ever felt small under someone else's thumb. To every veteran who came home only to be told they didn't belong. To every neighbor who was fined for living a little too boldly. It belongs to all of them. To all of you. And I promise you this. The next time someone tries to tag something you built, to reduce it to a violation, you remember this story. And you fight like hell. Because sometimes, Justice doesn't knock politely. Sometimes it floats quietly, out on the water, waiting to remind the world that some battles are still worth fighting. The summer after Karen left felt like a new beginning. The HOA was quieter now, less aggressive, more neighborly. The board held community cookouts instead of emergency votes. The bylaws were rewritten in plain English. And the fines? They almost disappeared. But the memory of what happened didn't fade. It lingered. Not in a bad way. Not like a scar. But like a lesson carved into the bones of the neighborhood. The dock became a gathering place. People started dropping by not just to see the boat, but to talk, to share stories, to say things they had kept buried for years. A man from 3 streets down told me he'd been fined for flying a Purple Heart flag and had taken it down just to avoid the hassle. He put it back up the next morning. Another neighbor admitted she had wanted to protest the fines against her garden beds but was too afraid of retaliation. She had just replanted all of them with bold bright colors and lined the edge with solar lights. Everyone was reclaiming their space, their identity, their voice. And it all started with that sticker. That one orange tag slapped on a Navy patrol boat. Karen thought she was enforcing the rules. What she really did was ignite a rebellion. The kind that spreads quietly. Not with shouting, but with flags, with flowers, with the soft hum of a diesel engine rolling across still water. One day, I got a letter from the new HOA president. He asked me if I'd considered joining the board. Said they needed someone with a sense of balance. Someone who knew what it meant to lead under pressure. Someone who had earned respect. I thought about it, long and hard. Then I politely declined. Because my role wasn't behind a desk with a gavel. It was out on the dock, on the lake, showing the next person what it means to stand your ground with dignity. I told them, I'll help, I'll support. But I'm not here to govern. I'm here to remind. That peace is only real when it's shared. The boat became more than just a story. She became a symbol. The local veterans group asked to host an annual flag ceremony on her deck. Every July 4th we raise the American flag and the Navy ensign together while taps plays across the lake. People gather in kayaks and paddle boats. Kids hold tiny flags. Seniors sit on folding chairs with tears in their eyes. No one mentions Karen. Not anymore. Not out loud. But we all remember. Not her face. Not her name. But what she represented. The kind of power that hides behind rules. That crushes instead of protects. And how quickly it all fell apart. Once we stood up. There were times I thought the whole thing was just a weird chapter. A one-time clash that spiraled out of control. But the truth is, it was part of something much larger. A shift, a reckoning, a return to reason. Because when one voice speaks out, it invites others to follow. And when that voice carries weight, it changes the balance. I still get emails. People from other states, other HOs, telling me their stories. How they saw my news segment. How they filed their first complaint. How they demanded to see the bylaws in full. How they pulled their flags back out of the garage. Every time I read one of those messages, I feel it. That quiet click of something falling into place. That sense that maybe, just maybe, we turn the tide. One day, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a photo. Karen. Standing in front of a Florida condo complex. Wearing a name tag. And a new title. HOA Enforcement Liaison. I laughed. Not because it was funny. But because it proved something. Some people never learn. Some people live for the clipboard. Live for control. Live for the illusion of order. And maybe, just maybe, someone down there in Florida was about to teach her another lesson. I threw the envelope away. No need to keep reminders of storms we've already survived. I took the boat out that afternoon. Smooth waters. Clear skies. No noise. Just the soft churn of the engine and the quiet slosh of waves hitting the dock. I stood at the bow and looked out at the horizon. At the flags rippling in the breeze. At the sun bouncing off the water like gold scattered across a mirror. And I remembered something. Something every sailor learns early on. You don't steer by looking at your wake. You steer by watching the stars. By knowing where you're going. Not where you've been. Karen was in the past. The fight was behind me. But the mission, that stayed. I still check the ropes twice. Still polish the railings. Still keep the engine humming like a heartbeat. Because symbols don't take days off. They stand. Even when no one's looking. Especially then. And if one orange sticker can ripple across a neighborhood, across a state, across the country, imagine what one voice can do. One choice. One refusal to be silenced. That's the real story. Not the fine. Not the boat. Not even Karen. It's what came after. It's what comes next. Because somewhere out there, another HOA is drafting a fine. Another board is overreaching. And someone's standing at their front door, reading that paper, holding their breath, wondering if they should fight back. Let them hear this story. Let them hear your voice. Let them know that out on a quiet lake in South Carolina, a patrol boat stood its ground and never moved again. Because freedom doesn't yield, floats, to the very end. You felt that story. If it made you think twice about power and standing up for what's right, then don't forget to like, drop a comment, and subscribe to HOA Confidential. Because out here, every voice counts, and every story matters.